Hey, everybody. In this week's episode, we're going to be getting into how we are all responsible for co creating our reality and how our state of mind and our free will are fundamentally important in this process. And that's coming up next.
All right. You are listening to the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos, exploring deeper knowledge and understanding of the universe and ourselves. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
If you're new here, what are you doing? Subscribe, join us, and we'll see you back every week for new episodes. We appreciate that very much. In this week's episode, another laying the fundamentals, the foundations. This one is all about co-creating our reality and how that is governed by the dynamics of the principle of mentalism and the principle of free will. These are inherent to your being, to who you are and what you are, and they are absolutely central to in understanding these things, in what is going to dictate the outcome and experience of your entire life. So very, very important topic. We're passionate about it. We've really touched on it a few times in different episodes, but we felt that, it was time to give it its entire episode to focus on this great and rich topic to get into here. So,
yeah, I mean, it's something that I think a lot of people might experience a little confusion with, because there's kind of different extremes where you'll see people don't think they really have any power in creating their reality. They're just a total victim of circumstance, or, they believe a sky daddy or something is dictating their whole life. Then on the other hand, you have people like solipsists that believe that only they exist, that everything is only in their mind, or there's kind of even the new age version of it where you create your own reality. That's, again, it's only a half truth. It's a collective process. We're co-creating our realities, and each individual has a part in that to play. But that being said, when you start to study magic and dive into your own knowledge and development, that's what magic really is attuning your system to nature and being able to enhance your effect on it. So you can create or have more of an impact on how you affect your reality by how much effort and intention you put into that. Right. So it's a lot of variables at play here. There's not just a black and white answer. So we're going to be diving into all the nuance of this.
Right, and we'll be unpacking a lot of what we've already kind of touched on here as we move forward. But as we like to do here, we kind of start with the core assumptions or the fundamentals that everything else will be built upon. So referring back to the part of the title, what is the law of mentalism? Again, we've mentioned this before, but for those unfamiliar, this comes from the 7 Hermetic principles. And there's a lot of debate on where these actually came from. Most people are familiar with them from the book called the Kabbalion, which really isn't a very old text, and this knowledge had been around for much longer than this. There's many forms of it. Supposedly came from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth in Egypt, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great one, however you want to accredit it to. But, we're not trying to debate really the source of them as much as just give credit towards the usefulness and validity of the knowledge. So it is a book of very useful wisdom. And in it, it lays out 7 universal laws that really govern and affect every single thing in it. And so this one being the very first one, the principle of mentalism, this essentially means that everything is a manifestation of mind, whether in the macro scale of the all, as it refers to, if you want to call it God or a creator or just an intelligence, whatever you're comfortable with, that's what that's referring to. And then in the micro, being the individual level, that we are sort of a microcosmic fractalization of that greater. And then we are miniature observers and creators ourselves. And through anything that we create, we must first visualize it or conceive of it in the mind first, and then bring it into reality through our actions. And with the law of correspondence, you may have probably heard this somewhere and just didn't know where it came from, but as above, so below, and as within, so without. In other words, everything has a sort of a mirror image aspect or component to it, or a duality, like a polarity to it, perhaps. And then it does get into polarity later, but just for the purposes of this episode, we wanted to kind of lay the foundation for those two principles specifically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as Logan said, what's important when looking at the Hermetic principles, or it's less for me about so much like where they came from, as these laws are observable in nature. I actually these were things I discovered on my own before I ever came into any alternative media or started diving into the occult. They were things I learned and observed through my own experience. And even though they weren't worded or summed up in the exact same way, for me, they had the same effect, and I've shared on the show before, like what those were, where I talked about the concept of everything being the same, just in a different way. That to me, that's really hinting on like how he's explaining of we're all fractals of the all. If you think of all of existence as the mind of the all, each of us are like individual thought forms of it. Or one way I've thought of it is, we're both like a projector and a receiver. So if you're thinking of like different radio stations, each one of us is like our own little channel. It's still the radio, like all the frequencies there, and then everybody has like their own little thing that they're doing. That's one way you can look at it. But we're all experiencing and learning about itself. Each one of our lives has different experiences and lessons, and all of that information is being fed into the collective consciousness, to create our reality. So, a very beautiful way to look at the world, because it's a balanced perspective, because it's acknowledging you and your power as an individual, as well as the fact that you are connected to everything else as well. And when you operate from that as the foundational principle that you operate your life from, you will see very magical things start to happen. It's a very powerful thing to understand. It may seem simple at first, but the more you delve into it, the more depth you'll find. And then the law of. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to quickly add to what you were saying, because it's interesting to think of, like, I talk about the macro and the micro, and as above, so below, but there's kind of almost that third component, which is nice when you look at sort of the triality of things, of not just scrapping the two for the one, but incorporating the two into a one to create the triangle. In this way, there is the universe, and there is us, the individuals, but there's also our place in it. Like, how do the two fit together? That in and of itself is really the key. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful concept to ponder, and then the law of correspondence, that's one we talk about a lot on the show, because it's something that you can see, and it leads into the next point, I think, is demonstrated very much so through the law of correspondence, and it's that everything in the universe is both a projection and a reflection. So when we understand we're creating our reality, when you delve into this psychologically, you can see that we're all projecting at some point. We're projecting our internal world, the way we view the world, onto our external reality through our actions, because the way we're viewing our world, that's determining and, adding to that decision-making process of what actions that we're going to take, which is going to have an effect on the reality and what we create. So there's that projection there. And then the reflection we get back is the effect from the cause that we've put out there. So there's always a projection and a reflection going on. And if you think about this as it applies to the principle of mentalism, each one of us being a thought and a thought pattern in the mind of the all, those thoughts are then projecting, and then they're having experience with other thoughts, just like in your mind. Like, you'll have one thought and then something else will pop up in there. And there's like this this little at play, this learning process going on. That's a microcosm of what's happening in the macrocosm. Like we're just a little fractal of it all. So this understanding projection and reflection, that's how our reality is created.
Absolutely. And I like to look at it like this idea of an organizing principle, because you can see this when you look at the spiral and fractals and these major meta systems that can be observed in such a way it's impossible to negate the intelligence of the design of things in nature. And so that's what I'm kind of referring to when I think about like that divine intelligence is the organizing principle that creates infinite beauty, each fractal more complex and rich and beautiful than the next. And so this relationship really is a two-way street of the projection and reflection, because the laws of nature literally created us, caused us to vibrated us into existence out of inanimate matter and imbued it with consciousness, and that's what we are. But then we are then interacting back with that universe that created us and shaping it in our vision through the principle of mentalism as well. So it's a feedback loop. I don't mean the unconscious feedback loop, which we've talked about, but a feedback loop like when you point the microphone to the speaker when you're singing karaoke and it goes and everybody like goes like this. That's because the microphone is picking up the speaker, which is spitting it back out the speaker and back into the microphone. It's in and out and in and out. So in every moment, we are interacting with the universe and shaping it, while the universe and its subsequent experience is continuing to shape us as we advance through our human journey of transformation.
Right. And that's where I think, for me, especially like as I stepped more into the pagan, the animist mindset, that really for me is what it truly takes to fully understand these principles. We have to understand these are principles that you're not going to understand through a monotheistic or Abrahamic viewpoint. You're going to be limited on your understanding of them if you're coming at it from that perspective. Even just the animist, that is understanding that everything has consciousness. That's the principle of mentalism right there. That's the foundation of all indigenous cultures all over the world.
When we talk a lot about being in tune with the cycles of nature, well, that's the principle of vibration. Everything is constantly moving and oscillating.
Right, and the changes. Like with astrology, that's a beautiful example of the law of correspondence. That's the astrology is the practice of the law, the principle of mentalism. It's all there. So these laws, even though like as you're reading them, say you're reading them in the book, it's not going to take you long to read them at all. But they'll take you lifetimes to fully understand, and you have to set aside all your indoctrination. And most important, I found my most important and valuable source for learning cosmic law is observing, just like through my own life and like my own realizations, like I was talking about with everything being the same in a different way. When I had that was a realization that it blew my mind, and it changed. It drastically changed my life, as well as like the other one that I like to say, which is, understanding complicated simplicity. That's definitely something you could apply to this concept. Like, yes, in our reality, like you could say it very simply that like, yes, we co-create our reality. It's very complex in how that plays out, because each individual is, you could apply that to as well. They're both an individual, but they are complex in their own nature. And then you add that to the complexity of many individuals. Like there's always so many variables going on. You can't view the world in these simply black and white terms and really get the full richness of understanding like the Hermetic principles. You have to be able to see the nuance in things and the complexity in things, as well as be able to grasp the simplicity of what's all happening, which is, we're the universe experiencing itself.
Very well said. Yeah, because if you think about what the world is, the world of humans, the worlds that we've created, and go ahead and remove all the bullshit, the governments and the religions and the suicide bombings and school shootings and all that kind of stuff, what do you have left but just all these individual consciousnesses trying to create things that they imagine, whether somebody that starts a business and they come up with the logo and what they want the building to look like and all these things. It's just everybody kind of sharing themselves with each other and fitting each of our own unique skills and talents in to serve the other, to serve each, and we all get the abundance of what we need. It kind of reminds me of that. I saw a GIF recently that I thought was really, really profound yet simple, which is a great example of complicated simplicity. It was this animation of these people that were sitting around a huge vat of soup, and they all had a spoon that was very long. So they can't feed themselves with their own spoon because it's too long, it won't reach. And so at first they're all kind of like getting frustrated and trying to like fight each other and stuff like this. And then they figure out, well, if I just feed the person over here, this person over here can feed me. We all get fed just by helping each other. It's like such a simple yet very profound allegory for this concept. But, you know, people are creating through the lens of their own mind. So if a person has really bad beliefs, harmful beliefs, or self-destructive beliefs, that's going to play out in what they're creating. So it's very important that you're working from a clean and truthful operating system. And this is referring to the trivium. So we don't want to get too in depth because we actually have done an episode on this. So we'll put a link for that one. But understanding the trivium and how we actually are creating the experience. So many people that are easy to complain about the problems of the world have zero clue about how to solve something from the root cause level, rather than just pointing at the symptoms and probably being part of the problem themselves.
Right. When we've talked about that a lot on the show, you know, you have to take things down to their foundational assumptions. And as Logan mentioned, you know, if your foundational format that you're operating from, a belief system, is harmful, say it, and this is why I say you can't really understand the Hermetic principles from a monotheistic or Abrahamic perspective. If your foundational belief system is harmful in regards to, like, you believe people are just sinful just for being, or that there's this almighty sky father that's determining everything, that it immediately leaves you from you're powerless. That's a total lack of understanding of the principle mentalism, of that you have the power to, like, your mind and what you have going on and the actions that you take are what co-create reality. You're not at the whim of some, you know, super being that's going to punish you. So, you know, that's why the animist mindset, that's the foundational assumption that everything is built off of, is the principle mentalism. That's why that's the first Hermetic principle. It's the foundational of any indigenous cultures, that everything's consciousness, that everything has a life to it,
Right.
and a right to exist as an individual. Like nothing, it's a system of working together. Like nothing's elevated above another, which is very different from an Abrahamic or monotheistic worldview. That's why, you know, you get a lot of confusion where people will, if they've been raised in a Christian worldview here in the West, and then they start to, say, get into like the truth movement, and they get onto these, they'll find these, there's a lot of sharing the memes of what they are, but you'll see maybe a lot of lack of understanding, or these principles actually being applied and put to work. One of the episodes we just did, you know, with our macrocosm, you know, we're kind of looking at the psychic weather of what's going on. That would be a great example of what I'm talking about here. You know, if we're talking about the principle of mentalism, you being in control of your mind to where you're not allowing a control system, even if it does exist, to affect you, or to dim your magic or your purpose, or to stop or control what you're doing. Like owning your own mind, and regardless of what's going on, knowing that you're just going to disobey and do whatever you would be doing anyway. And yeah, that might include consequences, but, you know, that's just,
well, yeah,
that's part of it, you know.
Exactly. Like even if your false assumption appears harmless, or isn't, you know, overtly violent or something, like, you know, kill all infidels or something like that, it can still be dangerous to you or others, because, you know, look at it this way. Imagine an architect tries to build a house with two different rulers that has an inch that, the inch is two different sizes. Well, their house would suck and it would be all janky and falling apart because they built it on false assumptions of an inch equals this. So many people, they make a statement or they ask a question that is already preloaded with all of these. Well, to even answer this question, you have to agree with the presupposition that X is true, and sometimes is not true. So that's what we're getting at there. But
that's a really great metaphor for that. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Just as being a construction guy, it really resonates. It's like, okay, yeah, it'd be really fucked up, like no doubt about it.
Right. An inch has to be an inch, and truth has to be consistent. And once you've found truth or knowledge, I should say, that is truth, then it's never going to be untrue without the variables changing, because by using that piece of information, it's always going to lead you to a correct assumption or
right. And that's a great way you put it, because that's what these hermetic principles, that's what those are. These are your foundational assumptions or operating system. Yes. that you should understand, that these apply to every situation, every aspect of the universe. These are the fundamental operating programming that we're all subject to. So that's again, we're really getting down to the root cause of things, and understanding these and incorporating them into your life, you will absolutely notice a change in your ability to affect your reality. You can choose to have a very, we all have an effect, whether we realize it or not. We all have a profound effect, but when you can consciously step into that, so instead of creating reality from an unconscious place and just creating a bunch of chaos that you say you didn't really want, but that's what you created. That's a lot different from stepping in. That's what being aware and awake is. You're stepping into a place of awareness of how you are creating your reality, and then using your will and your intention to directly influence that to create what you actually want. That's what it's really all about.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing we wanted to consider here is that each being has autonomous free will, which means it stands on its own. It doesn't come from any external source. It is inherent to its very being. So this freedom, you could call it rights or whatever, which is correct as well, because a right is simply a freedom that you have the right to take. In other words, your action is not causing harm or infringing on the freedom or well-being of any other beings. And so in context to this conversation, we are co-creating our reality. And that's really kind of the main highlight we wanted to focus on with this episode, is keyword co-creating. There's lots of, jargon going around with this sentiment of you create your own reality, which is really a poor choice of words, I would say. It's really feeding and fueling a lot of bad concepts that some people take very literally, and talk about a false assumption that's going to lead you to a lot of suffering. That's a great example of one. So we're really trying to set that straight with this. Each person is creating on their own accord. Just because you chose to go down a dark alleyway doesn't automatically mean you manifested that you got mugged or something, or even if you were afraid. Just because you're feeling fear or in a negative vibration doesn't mean you attracted a mugger. That's just, to act like that's the case with every single situation is very, very imbalanced and just not going to serve you very well, using it as a foundational belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Understanding that we're co-creating, we're each as individuals taking actions, and then all of those collectively add up in the aggregate to determine the outcome of what we're going to experience, which means that we as a collective people really do have the power to create any kind of reality that we want. And an individual can enhance their influence that they have to affect that change on reality, and you've seen that all throughout history where an individual or certain individuals have had such an effect on the reality field that it literally changed the course of history or changed the world. Like we're all very capable of doing this. Again, it's all about stepping into the awareness of just how powerful we really are, and understanding these the foundational cosmic laws. That's where you have to start, and then you have to build off of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to follow the logic of that kind of concept, I like to look at sort of a genocide situation, for example. So someone is giving orders that's making an army of people go and wipe out just thousands or millions of other people. Can you really say with a straight face and honestly that you believe that those people just had it coming because they were thinking negative thoughts and that they attracted that? No. That's absolute nonsense. And you can see that the logic just completely breaks down at that level. Each actor in that scenario chose to play their part and could have chosen something different. But, you can't blaming an entire group of people for some kind of tragedy like that. Somebody chooses to harm someone else that may have had nothing to do with them or what they chose or any of that. I can't choose to hurt somebody and say they chose it.
It's always happening. It's a cosmic dance. Like that affects all of us. But when we as a soul choose to have like certain experiences, like yes, we have those experiences, but it's an interplay. Like we choose to have a contract with someone, and it may not be a specifically, oh, this is going to happen. It's just an experience. It's a dance that's going to happen. This is why if you really want to understand the birth charts, like understand that we're co-creating, that's important for the astrology. You can choose to experience difficult and challenging things, but that doesn't mean people are then just free to do whatever they want. And like, oh, you chose difficult things. They also had experience or things that they wanted to choose, and to experience. So part of a soul contract could even be that you wanted to, say a person was wanting to learn about not being racist or something, right? They need to learn a lesson about loving other human beings. So, and that they set up a soul contract with another part of the universe, another part of the mind of the all that is going through a learning process. Inherently part of learning is not just getting things correct, but messing up, making those mistakes. Mm-hmm. Because it's the apophatic learning process. Like both of those are really inherent for us to truly learn. Like they're equally as important factors. So I think it's that understanding that we need both, like that young childlike mind, like they're going to make mistakes. Just
right. It's almost like the archetypal mother and father. The father says it's not okay to make a mistake. That's why it's a mistake, because you failed at what you were trying to do objectively. That's not even being mean. That's just saying you tried this and you didn't succeed, therefore you failed, and it's not okay. But then the divine mother is like, oh, it's okay. We all make mistakes. It's just part of the journey, and it's all beautiful, just like you said, Brian.
Right. Yeah.
But
there we go.
Coalescing these two, like I said, it's like each truth is true on its own, but it's hard to actually reconcile them together or they clash.
Well, I guess to me, what that's speaking to is obviously it's the masculine and the feminine. So what they may seem very contradictory, but I think they actually need each other, which is how I'm seeing this. Is your goal is to learn and to try to do as much good or gain as much wisdom as you can. But part of that process is also making those mistakes. Right. So that's where it's you making a mistake is not only fulfilling something for you to learn a lesson, but for whoever else is experiencing the consequences of that. Us all choosing to vote for government and then seeing the world go to complete shit is teaching us the lesson that we need to be fucking sovereign, that we need to understand the side of this of respecting other people's boundaries and not doing that wrong action. But that's, again,
100% on point. I fully agree.
Beautiful dance that we have to have that both. So they seem contradictory, but they do need to meld together.
Yes, but I guess it's great that you said dance, because that's where I was going to go with it too, is because it's like when I think of it now, this dance between the masculine and feminine, it's like you're dancing from moment to moment, feeling into intuitively is which is more true in this moment, the masculine or the feminine. Is this the time to be hard and push through, or is this the time to be soft and connect
Yes.
and open up? But it's that ever changing. But that's the thing. So like these two concepts that are true, that we can see and feel are true, but trying to make them both true at the same time is where they conflict. So it's more of like, which truth are you tapping into, the masculine or the fatherly truth, or the motherly wisdom sort of thing?
Right. Like, do you need to, in the masculine action, like take responsibility for actions and like, oh, I had this cause
Mm-hmm.
which created this effect, you know, and be able to like objectively judge whether something is right or wrong or causing harm or not. And then that being used with the care of that, oh, we're all connected. That's where the key for learning to choose not to do wrong action comes from,
Right,
is
because
that integration with
you
the
could look
feminine.
at it, this dance between accountability and forgiveness, because both are important. If you're so rigid that then a person is completely shut down and can't even have any freedom to thrive and and feel free to make those mistakes. I mean, that's what our fucking school system does to our
Right.
brains, is the programs of that the red X is bad, and oh my God, I can't make a mistake because that would be, wrong. There's no forgiveness there, but yet too much forgiveness makes you soft. If every time you fuck up, you're just like, oh no, it's okay, just keep on doing it, you're doing great, and like, then the person's never going to push back towards that challenge to try to rise above and like overcome it too. So there
Right.
really has to be a balance of strict discipline and loving encouragement and forgiveness that comes
Right.
both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it goes down to that play between the masculine and the feminine. So, and I think that would definitely be the key to kind of reconciling those. So that, like, yeah, we chose to have things, but that doesn't mean we should just then be like, oh well, we can do whatever the fuck, because it must just we're here to choose to try to do as much. It's almost like with veganism.
Right.
When you look at veganism, you're trying to do as little harm as possible. Right.
You're basically you're acting in the fatherly, as in, I'm going to do the very best that I can and try not to make mistakes. But then you're reacting in the mother. Oh, I just made a mistake, but that's okay. I'm just going to keep on going. And you're not like beating yourself up too badly about it. You acknowledge, oh, that was a fuck up. You try harder, but don't just totally get all in your head and be like, oh, I'm failing. It's all going to shit. And
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, like I said, yeah. And then I think that, yeah, that's we're getting somewhere now. Yeah, definitely bringing in that masculine and feminine dance, because that's, well, if we look at like the example of the relationship, like here, obviously, I had a karmic relationship that a lot of things were done, and they weren't necessarily things that were like right or okay for her to do, but at the same time, like, it's really been a really valuable lesson, like a really really valuable lesson. Like, there was definitely a lot of karmic lessons that we both taught each other. And I think that's, again, we have to look at too, that we all do both. Like, we all hurt other people. We all make other people feel great. Like, it's we're not just these black and white beings. We're these, very complex creatures. And I think that's where maybe a lot of that, again, within the truth movement, and how they get very rigid on the Hermetic principles, and it's like the 10 Commandments all of a sudden, but they're not. And especially with like the morality side of things, about it's just all black and white. This is where like that nuance and that great, exactly. Like,
you could think about this. The phrase "least harm possible" has a built-in assumption to, I was talking about earlier, something that has pre-existing, like, in order for this to be true, another thing has to also be true, or else the other statement is invalid. Least harm possible is pointing towards the intentions of that person, but also the actions. Their actions may be causing harm, but they're actually trying to do the least harm possible for them.
right. exactly.
So
Like,
there's
and
that forgiveness and that accountability built into that.
yeah, so it's, like I said, it's this, yeah, very dynamic dance. And I think this is maybe where a lot of people, this whole kind of area that may seem very contradictory, this is where maybe a lot of people are getting hung up,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And again, it goes back to what I was saying. Like, I really think getting the animist and the pagan perspective of understanding the cycles and the long arch of the soul and reincarnation, like that's so essential. Because if you're coming at it from the Christian worldview and you've just got this one chance, then all of a sudden morality becomes so rigid and black and white that you're incapable of understanding all the nuance.
Well, you're
You know,
incapable from refraining from sin, which is exactly what they tell you.
right? Yeah, like you don't even have a choice. You're just that way. Like, it's just, there's nothing. No matter what you do, you're just going to be sinful. So I mean, that's
Right.
yeah. I think, but I think that rigidity that we're seeing in the truth movement when it comes to morality and seeing it all black and white, that really does come from Christianity and like a disconnect with nature and just like how life works. Because I mean, you think about our ancient ancestors, like they experienced disease and death, and they had their kids die, and lots of fucking things that were really rough, to experience. But yet, they still saw life as like this really beautiful thing. Like, that was just how it was. So, I mean, it really is, like I said, you have to, like, getting back to like that complicated simplicity. That's what's so helpful for me for understanding these things, is being able to see that yeah, we have our individual free will that we are having effect on, but then, that can get extremely complex in how that's playing out with how we are all collectively creating our reality.
Right. I mean, it comes back to
see
that.
both sides of it to really get the full holistic picture and be able to appreciate each in its own form and how they work together.
Right, like the word you used earlier was nuance. That's exactly what it is. Any knucklehead that could latch onto one side, if they take that to an extreme 100%, then they're either a total doormat that's just like, oh, no one's responsible for anything. We're all just learning and just making mistakes together, even though, you're justifying rape and murder and all the things. The other side would be, like that sort of rigid morality, that black and white thinking, and total control freak behavior, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where it leads to dogma and like where kind of you can see that with the Abrahamic religions and things and how they got just so dogmatic that, oh, these are the 10 commandments and this is what God says, and anything outside of that is punishable by for eternity. So they just went real extreme with it. So that's why we say you really have to step into an animist or a pagan mindset to fully start to grasp these concepts and to actually integrate them into your life in ways that you're not running into contradictions, because it's you have to get out of the mindset of looking at things as either or and being able to see things as both. Like that's definitely something, and that takes a lot of practice to be able to see that, because that is the integration of the masculine and the feminine.
It's complicated simplicity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
well, for sure, this one is something that I wanted to introduce because it's so fundamental. I've said it before, and I will continue to just keep repeating this ad nauseum because it's so important that, your free will is inherent to you. Therefore, your rights as well. We talked a little bit about a right is just an action that you have the right to take, which is not causing harm. Your rights can never be taken away. They can only be violated. You know what I'm saying? Like, someone can choose to violate you, but that doesn't make you not a sovereign being, because that's just what you are.
Well, and even in situations like, keeping in mind that free will's always there. So, even in even very extreme situations, like, you always have a choice. It may not be a very great choice, but there's always a choice there that's, present. So, that really
look at voting, for example, as a great way to kind of observe this dynamic, because people think they're voting for a candidate. Well, you're choosing someone to choose for you. So you think you like them because they make certain promises, but then when they don't actually deliver on those promises, well, even though you chose to endorse that person and give them the power that they were given because you endorsed them, but then they did something you didn't like. Well, guess what? You didn't actually vote anything. You still have your own opinion. You didn't like it, what he did, even though you chose to give him that power. So that's kind of exposing the madness of voting and thinking that you can vote for a representative because you cannot delegate your own autonomy.
Right. Yeah. It's something that's always going to be there. We cannot necessarily change others directly, but we can take actions which influence change. So kind of like through this ripple effect. So, a good example that we could highlight here would be like the idea, and you kind of see this in the conscious community, that we need to wake people up, right? You hear this, oh, we got to wake everybody up. That, I think that's really lacking this fundamental understanding that it's not your place to do so, or to force them to have to cease to look at something that if that's not where they're at. And I'm not saying don't share information. There's, again, you have to see the nuance in it and the balance. Like, by all means, put out information, like put out your work. Don't go cram your work down everybody's throat. There's a difference there, So being able to see here that understanding this, you can remove that need to be the savior. I think understanding this helps get rid of that savior projection, or that savior programming that we've talked about before, where not only are people looking for and wanting a savior, but then they feel like they need to go save everybody else. They need to wake everybody else up. That's their projection. That's because they feel like they want to be saved,
Right.
So then they're wanting to fulfill that role in others. So,
and you can see both sides of this in terms of like, again, taking it back to this co-creating thing is, say for me, for example, I'm an anarchist. Well, just because I don't want government doesn't mean it's just going to disappear, because everyone else is out there co-creating the world, and more of them than us. Therefore, government it is. And so that does affect my life, even though I don't agree with it. Everyone else is collectively creating that. Therefore, there it is. And that's how reality actually works. And that's what we're saying. You don't live in a bubble. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but even within that, you still have the free will that, like, yes, government can exist. You can just choose to obey. Which, yes, that might bring more consequences and things. And this is what I like about the pagan animist perspective. And you understand that there's going to be challenges in life, that there's going to be consequences, and you're not expecting everything to be rainbows and sunshine, nor are you trying to spend your whole life avoiding like challenges and things, because when you do that, then you actually set yourself up for that more. When you see a challenge, being able to embrace it, the current state of the world would be an excellent fucking example of this. Like, yep, there's a lot of challenges going on. Well, you can choose to like feel a victim to it, or you can step into your power and then choose to really use that. And these are, this would be hinting at the fact that, as well as understanding this concept, is really how powerful you are, like in magic, that it's putting your intention out there, and then you understand that will create a ripple effect that can have an influence on others, that can have an influence on the reality field.
This actually brings up an interesting thought to me, because I was reading something. I saw a post on Facebook today where somebody was talking about how they were claiming that choosing to not vaccinate is a violation of the NAP. This is a great example to look at in context of this co-creating, because it's this idea of herd immunity. And it's, like, well, if you want to get sick, that's fine, but don't put the rest of us in danger, because we're co-creating our reality. Like, it affects, there's a ripple effect. Your very existence is a ripple effect. And so, back to the evangelical aspect, like you were just talking about, you could argue, well, people's ignorance is violating my NAP by default, because they're voting for a government that's taking my rights away, and I have the right to defend myself by shoving it down their throats and acting like Jehovah's Witnesses, riding around on my bicycle, versus just speaking from your own platform and offering it freely to those who are actually seeking that for themselves. That's their journey. And that's what we're getting at with the animist mindset of just, people will find truth when they're good and fucking ready, and no sooner. And nothing you can do, even if you think you influenced them to choose it. You didn't choose it for them. You just
Right.
showed them enough to where they were able to see it and then actually desire it. There is no escaping your free will. That's what we're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Exactly. Because you can, and you'll see that, like, if you, and a lot of you may have experienced this. I know I have, like, especially in your early stage, where if you're falling into this need to this savior programming, and you're trying to wake everybody up, and then you're getting frustrated because they're not getting it when you want them to. Like, that's it's something that once you understand that free will is, like, fundamental, you'll stop doing those behaviors where you're, like, trying to just wake a family member or a friend up, and, like, because I've seen a lot of people have those behaviors. I had them at one time, like, where there's a certain person, you kind of just, like, keep hounding them, and you're like, why won't you get this? Why won't you just see the truth? And then you see that person actually ends up, it backfires on you. Like, that person will actually, like, end up like, oh, I don't want you in my life. I'm sick of hearing about this. I don't want to talk about this. And then a lot of truthers will be like, oh, that's because they're just sheep. And no, it's because, like, even on an unconscious level, they can sense that you're violating their free will.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's why it's backfiring. So
it's an imposition.
Right. Yeah. So you have to understand that, the free will and cosmic law. And this is why these principles are so important. And again,
balancing them is so important.
And that's where I think boundaries is such a huge issue that comes in with this, is because understanding boundaries goes hand in hand with really understanding both sides of this. Like, not only do you as an individual, like, have your own right, but other people do as well. So you don't have the right to infringe upon them. So it's a recognition of both. It's that furizage rune, that thorn isn't going to go out of its way to harm you. It's only going to harm you if you infringe upon its boundaries. It's that balanced perspective of understanding both these aspects of both the individual and the collective as well.
Exactly. Do no harm, take no shit. And there again, balance is, something that needs to be applied to pretty much every single concept that we're talking about here. Is there's really this masculine and feminine interplay. So, like, not infringing on people by pushing your stuff on them, but also not staying silent when clearly the world is messed up. You're still defending yourself by speaking truth. That's a balance. That would correspond, law of correspondence, to the physical aspect of self-defense versus non-aggression principle, is a balance of those two dynamics that you have to have both of them to be a sovereign, autonomous being. So, just because you understand the non-aggression principle doesn't mean that others will, or much less that they'll actually respect it. Therefore, you need to be ready to enforce your boundaries, stand up for yourself, say the word no.
Right.
And so that's really the importance of, upholding a true sense of justice, not the criminal justice system that we have, but a true justice, including to yourself and others, holding people accountable for their actions, because apathy and vengeance is going to breed tyrants and slaves. And as we've said, you don't live in a bubble. We're co-creating reality, because if you're not thinking in that way, it's a very narcissistic mindset that everything that happens to you is somehow a reflection of you or your beliefs or your emotional state or your level of enlightenment or whatever. That's a very dangerous mindset to hold as like 100% truth, and it really is a quick and slippery slope to victim blaming, because then you could just easily say that anything bad that happens to people, there are no victims. They just brought that on themselves. Obviously you can't take some of the concepts on both sides to such an extreme as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, again, we were talking about earlier how having how important it is to have your foundational assumptions and operating system clean, because if you have a fear-based belief system, such as the Abrahamic belief system, that it really is like a mind virus, and it what it does is it wears down, like, your spiritual immune system, not only as an individual but especially as a collective. Especially for like religion like Christianity, it has been accepted and spread around in the collective so much that it really has had a massive effect on our reality and the world that we've experienced. When you have a foundational belief system that is inherently harmful or inherently not honoring free will or sovereignty or, you know, respecting any of these things that we've been talking about, then it's going to create that sick world, that sick society, which I think we can all look around and see our society, you know, as a whole definitely has a lot of issues. Well, you know, what has been some of the predominant, you know, thoughts and mindsets and foundational assumptions Western society has been operating off of for the last 2,000 years? You know, I mean, that's where it's at. It's in that Abrahamic mindset. So that's why you see us on the show. You know, it may seem like we just have an issue with them. It's not that we care what other people believe, beyond the fact that when people do have certain belief systems and they take actions on those, that has an effect on our reality. So
we're just defending ourselves, people. That's all we're doing from our own platforms.
Right. Well, yeah, it's about, like we're saying, you know, we're not going out. I'm not going to a church and telling everybody they need to become pagan. You know, we just put our information out there. So there's that balance, but definitely speaking out against harmful belief systems. That's something that's very needed. We really got into this we did a 2-part episode called the Coexist episode, where we questioned the idea of religious tolerance and things like that. And that's the reason, you know, we did those, is because it is so important to understand that foundational assumption and belief system, if that's the filter that all your actions and decisions are being put through, if you have a dirty or shitty filter, you know, like those actions are going to come out that way. You know, they're going to be actions that aren't creating what we really want in the world. And we're going to be creating a society of people that are just made to bow down to whatever authority figure gives them the 10 Commandments, or whether they call it a new law or whatever it is. Exactly. It's the same fucking thing.
Right. I mean, there's the principle of mentalism. A fear-based mindset is going to beget an authoritarian system, and then an authoritarian system is going to propagate a fear-based mindset. It feeds itself in that loop. You know, and it's interesting to look at the dynamic of the left and the right, in which authoritarian daddy figure they prefer, because the left is usually much bigger statist, but a lot more towards atheism, and then the right is very more minarchist or libertarian, but then their sky daddy takes, you know, the big throne and dictates their life. So you can see that both statism and religions, specifically the ones that we're talking about, are all fear-based religions. They're fear-based belief systems, and they're symptoms of a collective immune system that is compromised and very sick. So, you know, like with anything, you have to break the cycle. You can't spend all day worrying about the chicken or the egg. You just have to change your behavior. It doesn't matter who started it, just end it, you know, change it, divert the course. Because that victimhood mindset always leads to stagnation. If you're not transmuting and rising above, that stagnation will fester, and, you know, people will never act if they don't think they can change anything. And most people are in such a horribly disempowered mindset, succumbed to their own helpless situation. So that's why we stress the warrior mindset, the empowered mindset so much, because yes, you can't control what other people do. And that's what we've said. Everyone has their own free will, but what you can do is arm yourself with knowledge and be willing to stand up for your own boundaries when those boundaries are challenged. And that's what you can do. And that's what that will empower you.
Right. Because it's understanding that no matter what situation you're encountering, like, there's always going to be a change. There's always going to be a shift in things. And it's up to you as an individual to remain empowered and then direct that in the way that's like best for you. That's going to lead to your empowerment and you being able to do what you want in life and create and things like that. So, you know, again, these very, very foundational principles and understandings to start incorporating into your life and putting into practice, because they really will radically change the way you view the world and how you go about your decision-making process.
So that's all we have for you today. We hope this has been thought-provoking. We care so much about you, the viewer, and thank you for your support. It really does help us and keeps us going. But also, we do this work for free, and so obviously our products and services help us continue this work as well, and those can all be found at thewizardfactory.com. So check that out. And that's all we have this week. But until next week, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.